All right, guys, we got something else to talk about today. Pretty big news. Of course, everybody's freaking out everywhere about Spider-Man leaving the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And there's a lot going on with this story, and I've yet to see one news outlet kind of put everything together. Everybody has little bits and pieces that they're throwing out there, but there's a lot of stuff going on involved in this. But here, let's talk about some of the basics as we get started here. Now, first, obviously, we have the fact that Spider-Man is leaving the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Sony and Marvel, Disney, effectively, could not come up with some sort of, working plan in order to keep Spider-Man in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And it all goes back to the original deal that was made between Sony and Marvel all these years ago. Let's see. If we can think back to what the original deal was that came with Marvel and Sony working things out together, what you had was this structure where Sony would put all the money in the production of the films, they would make all the films, and they would keep all the profits. But they own the characters, the rights to the characters to make movies for Spider-Man. Several years ago, they also had the merchandising rights, but they sold them back to Marvel because they weren't making a lot of money off the movies, and the tie-in stuff just wasn't working out. So Marvel bought back the rights to the merchandise in like 2011. So the last few movies that they had done, they didn't have the merchandising rights for. So whatever. So then Sony starts thinking about, hey, we're going to do new Spider-Man, we're going to do Venom, we're going to do some other stuff. They work out a deal with Marvel. Marvel comes to them and says, we really want Spider-Man in the MCU. And so they work out this deal where Sony actually pays Marvel 5% off the first dollar gross, I think is what it's called. So basically, when tickets are being sold at the box office and the money is coming into the studio, Marvel would get a cut of the money that was coming in, the gross coming in. So that means before they take out whatever deals they have set up for marketing, and before they cover the expenses of the film and all of that, it's not from the real profit that Sony takes home. It's from skimming off the top before they start doing all that other stuff. And so Marvel gets this little cut out of the box office that goes back to them. But in exchange, they get access to Kevin Feige. And Kevin Feige, of course, was the guy who produced all of the Marvel Cinematic Universe movies. And it was a big deal that they could basically get his ear, find out what was happening in the Marvel Universe, and then their stories become part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So they're able to tie Spider-Man back in, tie their movies in, but in exchange, they're still Sony properties, and Sony is still making the movies and keeping the profits off of this. Now, here's the other thing you have to keep in mind. When we're talking about profits on the movie, a lot of people look at the box office and say, look, Spider-Man Far From Home, it made $1 billion at the box office. So Sony has $1 billion, and they gave a cut of 5% of $1 billion to Marvel. And that's kind of true. I mean, there's a lot more creative accounting that goes on in this stuff, but more or less, yeah, they got 5% of that $1 billion for basically allowing Spider-Man, the movies from Sony, to have more of a feel of the Marvel Cinematic Universe and to talk about some of those characters, bringing Tony Stark and that kind of stuff. But Sony didn't make $1 billion profit. That $1 billion that you see that everybody throws around, that's the box office. Made $1 billion at the box office. Sony doesn't get $1 billion from the box office because the theaters get a cut, the distributors get a cut, and then Sony would get their cut. And then their cut, of course, has to get broken down into what goes into marketing and what goes into the production and what goes into paying people who have a cut. A lot of times producers get a percentage cut, and they get it off of the gross profits and not the net profits. So there's a lot of stuff. So Sony really, what it came down to on something like Far From Home, for every dollar they invested, they got about $1.45 back. So they made a profit, but the profit was nowhere near $1 billion. The profit that they actually kept was something like $280 million or something like that, which, I mean, yeah, that's a lot of money. It's not $1 billion. So keep that in mind. So what it sounds like was happening now, if we can get back over to some of the news, basically what Disney was saying, they were coming back and they were saying, we want to tie in even closer. And what we want to do is make a 50-50 split for production and profits on all of your Spider-Man franchise movies. So not just Spider-Man and Spider-Man Far From Home and Spider-Man Homecoming and whatever the next one's called, Spider-Man Homeless, I don't know, whatever they're going to call it. They also wanted to get involved with Venom, with maybe the Carnage. They're working on some Carnage thing, working on, what was the other, Black Cat and Silver Sable. All of these other projects that Sony was working to spin off of. There's a Kraven the Hunter series. There's a Morbius movie series that they're going to be working on. So all of these things coming out of Spider-Man, Marvel basically said, we want to go 50-50. We'll split the production costs and then split the profits. And Sony said no. They basically said, we don't want you taking that much control and taking that much of the profit back out of it, because you also have to remember that Sony paid for the rights to make the Spider-Man movies in the first place. So the 50-50 split for production and profits is not that great of a split. On top of that, when we talk about Kevin Feige being involved in these movies, Kevin Feige, he actually had a small hand in working on some of the stuff like Venom. Basically, very early on in production, came to them in stuff like Far From Home. He was a pretty big into production with that. But with all these other movies, Kevin Feige's not going to be available to work on these films. So Marvel, wanting to do this 50-50 split, basically said, but you can't have Kevin Feige come in and do production stuff like he did on Far From Home and Homecoming, because he's working on the next batch of Marvel movies, and he's working on the stuff for the Disney Plus streaming service that's going to be exclusive to that, and he's working on something else. There's some other project, whatever. And Sony is looking at the deal. They don't have the rights to TV. So when it comes to something like Disney's streaming service, does that count as television? Does that mean that the rights over television, making a TV series, that technically would still fall back to Disney? Would they be able to do that on their streaming service? So are they, in a sense, going to double dip between the movies and then making a TV series? Are they going to try to make the movies a tie-in to something that's going to be exclusive to their Disney Plus streaming service, and Sony's not going to see any of that? So there were a lot of other issues involved that were just more than you give us money and we'll take money. You know, there's a lot more to it than just, you know, we want these profits, we want you to share these profits, we want to take these profits, you know, and help you to make the movies, because Sony, all they have are the movies. They don't have the merchandising, they don't have TV, they don't have the comics, they don't have anything else. And granted, the comic industry is almost dead. The toy industry is dying. There's not a lot of money in those anymore. But movies and TV, video games, that's where it's at as far as entertainment dollars in Hollywood. And Sony gets the movie. Anything else is going to Marvel. So Sony just doesn't want a deal. They don't get Kevin Feige. They lose half the profits because they're losing half the production, but then they may be backdooring something else that Disney is going to be doing on their streaming service or you know, wherever, that they're not getting a cut of. And word is they're already not too terribly happy about seeing Marvel making the comics that tied into the movie and not getting, you know, any part of that. Or maybe they got a really small fraction. I don't remember the exact deal, but a lot of moving pieces. So this is not just a story about Marvel is greedy, or Sony is greedy, Marvel is greedy, And these two studios are stealing a lot of money from each other. Febmon, I just saw that you're here in the chat. When does Sony's contract on Spidey run out? Does it expire? Disney Marvel just buy Sony's contract out. Same goes for X-Men, Fantastic Four. Sony's deal apparently covers Spider-Woman as well. Okay, some of these questions I can answer, some I can't. Sony's deal covers basically Spider-Man and any characters from the Spider-Man comics. So characters that originate in the Spider-Man comics. So they can do Kraven, they can do Venom, they can do Carnage, they can do Hobgoblin and Green Goblin, they can do the Sinister Six, they can do Kraven, Morbius, I think maybe Stiltman first appeared in Amazing Spider-Man. I'm not exactly sure, but hey, they can do Stiltman. So basically any of that stuff that's from the Spider-Man comics, they have the rights to. Anything that's not... so as far as Captain America, Iron Man, Hulk, all of that stuff, Thor, that are keystones of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, they don't have the rights to that. And so the deal with Marvel and Disney gave them the ability to talk about some of those characters, and they intertwined, Tony Stark and Peter Parker really good. As far as when the contract runs out, I believe it's a situation where they paid a certain amount for the rights, and they pay an ongoing licensing agreement. They had to pay a lot of money up front, and then they give a little trickle back for all the stuff they do. But as long as they produce items within a certain time frame, they continue to keep those rights. They don't lose the rights. So they don't expire at a particular date. They expire after a certain amount of time when Sony doesn't develop anything. This is the reason why the Fantastic Four movie. Marvel sold the rights to Fantastic Four a long time ago. There was a movie that was made in the 90s by Roger Corman, very low budget. You can find bootlegs of it at comic conventions. I'm sure you can find it online. They did a documentary about it you can find on Netflix or Amazon Prime. And basically, that movie was made on a very small budget and was completed, put in the can, and sat on a shelf and was never officially released. And the reason for that was they were whoever had the rights at the time, and I forget who it was it Orion? I think it was Orion Pictures had it at the time. Whoever had it at the time, they were going to lose the rights because they hadn't done anything. So time was running out. They had to get something made so that they could continue the rights. It would automatically renew. So they just made a movie for $1 million, whatever, with Roger Corman, very cheap. They made it very quick. They put it on the shelf and they never released it. But the fact that they produced it meant that they got to hold on to the rights. It renewed the deal. So basically, that's the deal that Sony has. Anything from the Spider-Man comics, as long as they're producing something, they get to hold on to it until a set period of time, and it may be 5 years or 8 years or something like that. So that's part of the reason why they did the Spider-Man movies with Sam Raimi. He had a script for a fourth one. It was pretty bad. They had James Cameron came in to try to write one. They didn't like it. They couldn't really find anything. So then they just relaunched the new ones with Andrew Garfield. And they tried to make it... they did a fairly decent job with them. They weren't the greatest, but they weren't terrible. Definitely better than Spider-Man 3, and I'll fight anybody who says Spider-Man 3 was good. But that's part of the reason why they did that, because they needed to start producing something. They couldn't find a script they like on the other ones. Time was running out. The deals weren't going to work with Raimi, with Cameron, with anyone else doing Spider-Man, so they basically had to find somebody who was passionate, wanted to make something, and they started with a whole new series from there. So as long as something's in the pipe. So making Venom basically allowed them to reassert their own corner of the universe that was separate from what was going on with Marvel Cinematic, because the Marvel Cinematic just covered the Spider-Man movies themselves. And Venom did okay. a lot of people liked it. It did fairly good. It made some money. So, not a lot of money, but it made some money, and it showed them that it was possible to be profitable. Now, we talked about Spider-Man Far From Home. Sony got like $1.45 from every dollar they actually invested once you cut out all the other taxes and fees and marketing and production costs and whatever. Venom only made like $1.10 or $1.12, something like that. It's not a huge amount. Deadline, which is a website that covers movie news and stuff, Deadline actually did a pretty good look at some of the profit breakdowns of these movies, and they did them years ago. These aren't something that they were doing just now, but you can find them if you do a search. So Sony gets to keep the rights to keep doing Spider-Man movies. Tom Holland is actually under contract to Sony, not to Marvel, so they can do more Spider-Man movies with Spider-Man and Ned and Betty and all of those guys. But I guess they just can't mention Tony Stark anymore. They can't have Happy Hogan in there anymore, or they're going to have to do some sort of shady thing where maybe Jon Favreau will appear as Aunt May's boyfriend in shadow, in silhouette. Like they'll do something where they're in like a dark room, but there's a lighted doorway, and she's standing there talking to him, and he'll come in and say some words to her and walk away, and he'll just be credited as Aunt May's boyfriend. And not Happy Hogan. They won't use the name of the character necessarily. They can do some tricky stuff like that. They can say, well, all the stuff that happened with those other guys downtown, or someone can create a new tech company, and they can just say, well, we compete with all of the big guys like Wayne Tech and whatever the Stark guy does and whatever. They can throw the name in there like that, but they can't use like logos. They can't set anything in the location, whatever. So they can make their own versions of some of those things without really using them. But as far as stuff like J. Jonah Jameson, of course, the Daily Bugle, all of that stuff still retains as part of Sony's deal with making those movies. So they're still going to feel like Spider-Man movies, and they're still going to be part of the whole, Spider-Man riff with these movies. But it does mean that Venom is not going to be part of Marvel Cinematic, and it never was as part of the original deal. But this breaking down means it's less likely that stuff is going to be enveloped back in. But hey, we can still get Carnage movies. Punisher's tricky because he did first appear in the Spider-Man books, but then he went solo, and I don't know exactly where that deal... because again, Sony's deal covers movies and not TV. So I'm not sure how that breaks down. And then, again, there can be lawsuits, there can be arguments, there can be all kinds of stuff. So now, Disney Marvel is just by Sony's contract out. Same goes for X-Men and Fantastic Four. The problem is Sony doesn't want to sell them. So if Marvel comes up and says, hey, we want to buy these back, sell them to us, they're going to go, fine, give us $400 billion. And so, and Marvel is going to go, that's crazy. We're not going to give you $400 billion for these things. And Sony is going to go, well, we don't want to sell. So you give us $400 billion, you can have them. If you don't give us $400 billion, then you can't have them. And Marvel is just going to go like, well, we don't really have that money laying around, and we don't want to give that to you. And that seems crazy. And they're just going to go, well, then I guess we don't have a deal. And that'll just be the end of that. So again, it is tricky, but a lot of it breaks down to a lot more than just Sony is greedy, evil, and they want to keep everything for themselves. And look, they made $1 billion, but they only paid $50 million to Marvel for what they got, and they should be willing to share those profits more. It's a lot more intricate and a lot more detailed than that. So it's not something that's a quick. It's not a quick fix. You can't just say, well, hey, do this, and it's taken care of. It's not going to be that easy. So a lot of moving parts. There's still hope. It looks like from the comments that Sony has put out, they said that, Kevin Feige had a role in stuff like Venom early on in production, even though he wasn't given a producer credit because it was a small thing early on, but he helped give ideas and kind of send it in the right direction. They wanted him to continue to be part of the deal, apparently, and Disney was just like, he's got too much stuff going on for us. You can't have him. We'll do some other stuff. We'll, whatever. And Sony just wasn't interested, because if they can't have that mastermind, then the deal doesn't work out for them as well. So it's and this is something that's not going to be cleared up for several movies. So if they make another Spider-Man film and it makes $800 million, okay, cool. They make a second Venom film and it makes $500 million, no problem. If they make the Silver Sable Black Cat movie, and it makes $600 million, great. But if each of those movies only makes $150 million to $200 million, then you're going to see Sony going, okay, well, we just can't make a profit off this stuff. So we'll have to figure out, some other deal. Or with the deal that they had worked out with X-Men and Fantastic Four being reincorporated into the Marvel Universe, Marvel Cinematic Universe, maybe whoever comes in to work on that, if Kevin Feige's not involved, and they have someone else who comes in, maybe they'll be a good enough person that they can talk with Sony and work something out. But like I said, there's a lot more going on, especially because Sony's deal is only for movies, and they don't want to do anything that upsets movies or sets up a back door for Marvel to then do something on Disney Plus as a show, as a series that they don't get any part of. So we'll have to just wait and see how all that stuff kind of shakes out and where it works. But yeah, it is really nasty and really tricky. And again, you can't just hate on Sony for this, because Marvel is the one who actually came up and wanted to change the deal. And Sony just basically said no. So if they had left the deal the way it was, it would have been fine and kept going. Marvel wanted to change the deal. Sony wasn't willing to do that. And so here we are. So, all right. That's going to do it for me, guys. I want to thank you all for watching. Don't forget to leave any comments down there. If you have other comments about the way the contracts work or whatever, just ask it and I'll research it and I'll see what I can find and I'll reply to you down below or maybe in a future video. If you have questions about anything else in the world of comics or toys or movies or whatever, you want more details on something or whatever, like I said, just drop a comment and I'll do my best to research it and see what I can do as far as getting some of that information. But that's going to do it for me, guys. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Maybe. If it stops. Is it going to stop? It'll never stop. Yes, I want it to stop.